As you think about Eastern Europe and where we are now, I want to explore two elements. So, one, when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, it feels at this point like with the new administration in the US, they are trying to find a way out of engagement, but they can't completely be seen to walk away and be giving total permission for Russia or any other state actor to start moving borders. At the same time, the Europeans are talking a bigger game. They're talking about rearmament. They're talking about pushing back, but they're a long way away from having a credible threat on that. This feels like a conflict that is stuck in some sort of a horrible draw that is still taking lives and is still destroying so much of the future of Ukraine. What do you see as the next step in this conflict? Because it doesn't feel like we're any closer to peace or one side or the other achieving any breakthrough.
Well, first of all, it's too early to be completely optimistic about the European role in it. The truth of the matter is there is a radical restructuring ongoing. It may not be going at the pace that we would like it to see, but it's very clear that the Europeans are certainly increasing their own armament and discussing policies that even a year ago would have seemed impossible. They're looking at strengthening NATO, at utilizing NATO, they're coordinating more on sanctions and looking even at building up its own military. I'm not going to say that that will happen overnight. It's going to be a very challenging path, but the fact that this is being discussed at all means that eventually there may be a breakthrough if they ramp up their capacity sufficiently and if they manage to position themselves in a more unequivocal way. What I mean by that is that for the past couple of decades, I would say since the end of the Cold War, economy was the major focus of the European Union and Western states in general. They believed that conventional warfare with traditional adversaries was far behind them. They focused almost exclusively on tactical counterterrorism, but there is also a strategic counterterrorism that looks into the role of larger state players that's still far away from being seriously considered, only starting to. And tactical counterterrorism was basically a response to non-state actors engaging in terrorist activity, and they saw economy and trade as the ultimate peacemaker that could overcome um, and build overcome challenges between different states and build bridges no matter who was in charge. That essentially empowered Russia, China, and Iran because European countries in particular, but even others, were willing to engage, normalize, and trade with them. This is, starting this view is finally starting to break down, although not fully, and Europeans, too, to some extent, are still treating these threats as somewhat separate and prioritizing different things from the US, and there isn't a full integrated outlook on all of this. Another factor that worth considering is Ukrainian own innovation. It is not as dependent on external resources as it was in the beginning of the war, and it's bringing results. Again, we are still far away from pushing Russian troops completely out of Ukrainian territories, but the fact that Russia has not been able to make substantial territorial progress in quite some time is a measure of success. And the fact that Russia is now focused on attacking civilians, horrible as it is from a humanitarian perspective, is also an acknowledgement of its military weakness that cannot be easily overcome, even with the methods that Russia has employed up until this point. Finally, the third factor that is yet to be fully developed but is starting to be considered is acquiring more integrated assistance from uh, the so-called global south, non-Western countries playing a role both diplomatically, on a humanitarian level, economic level, or even military level. We have seen a change from, for instance, India being almost exclusively tied economically and to some extent in defense to Russia, to becoming increasingly open to greater trade, and that includes selling ammunition to Ukraine, not what happened in the beginning of the war. We have seen countries like Saudi Arabia get involved in in the peace process, and but also get involved in increase their cooperation with the Ukraine quite substantially. And we're also seeing that a number of countries that have had positive relations with Russia up until this point are wary of the effect of the war on their own interests, such as access to grain, such as maritime security, such as information warfare uh, that undercuts their own interests to some respect. All of these things are signs that the situation within non-Western countries, who for a long time were completely disinterested in this conflict, is not as simple as it may appear and worthy of reconsidering strategically. And we are seeing that US has shown signs of finally understanding that point by, for instance, trying to both pressure and coax countries like UAE into focusing on US technology versus Chinese technology, and that's bearing some fruits. These countries are still harboring a lot of the hostile actors, Russian oligarchs, and so forth. But that situation could be fixable if US, Europe, and other Western states were focused on pressuring these countries to expel or not to cooperate with these actors, and offered lucrative alternatives and other prospects that uh, instead of simply threatening sanctions and so forth. So the independent economic growth of the Gulf states and India and some of the African countries, I think, that are inclined, by the way, to be more pro-Western, like Rwanda and Kenya, shows that there is definitely room for thinking outside the box in the way this whole situation is being handled. Maybe not directly, maybe not to expect these countries to provide huge weapons and military and logistical assistance, but I think creativity in diplomacy, creativity in incentives and deals, and providing priority trade status for countries that are more willing to cooperate with the West against these troublemaking actors could be the way to go. But both the US and Europe have been very hesitant. For the US, the answer is quite simple. There's been a very significant polarization in policy, and the current administration is extremely transactional and just not that interested in exploring this sort of network diplomacy. With Europe, dealing with non-Western countries on anything but direct trade has been problematic due to the differences in views on democracy, human rights, and so forth, which Europe has traditionally prioritized, politically speaking. So they're still willing to trade with these countries, but they're not necessarily willing to engage in very in-depth political rapprochement. And I think unless that starts to change, I don't really see a way out of the stalemate.